Chapter 231. What the hell is going on here? My grandfather shouted as he walked along the path that had been created by the knights. How terrifying that aura was. Even the knights couldn't make eye contact with my grandfather and bow their heads. You're here. Paras greeted me, seeing me following behind my grandfather. In this chaotic situation, Paras seemed relaxed, and maybe a little strange. At that time, a sharp voice intervened between Grandpa and Perez. This is an imperial affair. Outsiders should stay out of this. Outsiders? One of my grandfather's eyebrows went up. Although you're right, he paused, looking at Perez and continued. Can you explain first what's going on, Prince? Well, if the Empress doesn't want to talk, he can simply ask Perez. His Majesty has collapsed, but he is safe now and recovering. That's a good thing, but why did this situation happen? There was an order from His Majesty not to let anyone into the bedroom, but the Empress insisted on going inside. That's right. After hearing Perez's explanation, my grandfather looked back at the Empress and said, Why don't you go back to the Empress Palace and wait for His Majesty to ask for you, Empress? I have the right to check His Majesty's condition, the Empress answered without looking at my grandfather at all. Of course, the Empress has that right. Grandfather nodded and added, Although it can only happen if His Majesty passed away. I could clearly see the Empress' shoulders flinch. My grandfather looked coldly at the Empress and said, I see what happened now. It was a word mixed with ridicule. Doctor, yes, Lord Lombardi. The palace doctor, who was trembling as he stood in between the Empress and Paris, quickly answered my grandfather's call. How is His Majesty's condition? His Majesty passed the critical stage and should only need a good rest. What about further prognosis? To be honest, His Majesty will have to focus on his treatment for a while, because the situation almost became a big problem. Thank God, isn't it, Empress? But the Empress did not answer. It was then, with urgent footsteps, an Imperial Knight ran down the corridor and shouted, Ah, the Angenes family's troops are about to enter the Imperial Palace. They're crazy. I unconsciously made an impression on the Empress. With the Emperor down, the Angenes started to move. Their actions could be regarded as an act of treason. It was in an instant, not a day passed on, that they took the opportunity. Empress, my grandfather stared at Rabini and tried to warn her of something, but the Empress ignored him instead and called the Imperial Knight standing next to her. Vice Commander, get rid of those who are in my way. As the Angenes Knights arrived, they could not wait any longer. However, the Imperial Knights couldn't easily pull out their swords, even at the order of the Empress. It was because he knew well that if he pulled the sword out right here, there's no turning back anymore. What are you doing? Move! A loud voice came out of the Emperor's mouth. Jeez, damn it. Eventually, the commander of the 1st Knights Division drew his sword. The cool metal sound resonates through the hallway. However, the silence that followed was so deafening that you could hear a pin drop. While staring at each other, no one dares to move. The one thing that broke the silence was the sound of the door bursting open. It was the bedroom door of Emperor Jovanes. Everyone's eyes turned in that direction. His Majesty. Seeing the situation outside, the attendant barely spoke with his eyes open. His Majesty said to come in. To come in. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Are you conscious now? Hearing a familiar voice, Jovanes opened his eyes. Oh, Jovanes groaned with terrible exhaustion, as if his whole body had been crushed under a rock. Heop, oh, huff. He couldn't even breathe properly. Oh, what the hell, huh? Jovanes forcefully opened his eyes and frowned in pain, confirming the figure in front of him. Second Prince, oh, huh. Jovanes squeezed his chest once again. Your Majesty, you need to take this. The palace doctor was surprised but managed to pour more medicine into Jovanes' mouth. Perez asked the Emperor, who was slowly stabilizing. Do you remember what happened before you collapsed, Your Majesty? Before I collapsed? Jovanes breathed hard and pointed at the bottle that had fallen on the floor. That drink. There must be poison in it. Doctor, check the remaining liquor. Well, if we don't know what poison is it will take time to figure it out. When he was attacked by the head of Susu, he immediately looked for Dr. Istira, who found out what poison it was. Check whether it's the venom of a teethy spider. Yes, Your Highness. Jovanes asked as he was looking at the doctor, which was starting to move in a hurry. How come? It's that poison. Not long ago, I was attacked by an assassin who used the venom of a teethy spider. Even in confusion, Jovanes knew what Perez meant. There is one thing I must confess to you, Your Majesty. What is it? The tea I gave you before the competition contained an antidote. What? Just in case. I guess that's the reason why I'm alive. The Emperor no longer said anything, but frowned upon the doctor. After a while, the doctor exclaimed, It does contain the venom of the teethy spider. At that moment, Jovane's hand grabbed Perez's robe. It was strong and suitable for a man who just got poisoned and bedridden. In front of me right now, bring the Empress. His face distorted and his eyes shone in anger. Perez did not hold or comfort the Emperor's hand. I have a suggestion, he said to Jovanes in a dry voice. Do you not want to see how the world will flow after the news of your Majesty's death? Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. His Majesty. The Empress asked back in a trembling voice. Her shaking eyes stared at the wide-open bedroom door. It was the Emperor's bedroom that she was so eager to enter with before, but now the Empress did not move from where she stood. Let's go in, Paris said, opening the way for the Empress. His Majesty is calling you now, is he not? He dawned in expressionless eyes, but he was smiling. The Empress began to move slowly. The shoe-clad body reeled as if it were going to fall precariously at once, but no one tried to help her. After that, my grandfather followed inside. Can I come in too? As I hesitated for a moment, thinking so, Perez beckoned me in a small voice. Let's go, Tia. Oh, I see. This is the moment you bet everything to prepare. Perez's eyes were talking like I want you to be a witness to my victory. Then there was nothing more to hesitate about. Let's go, I replied and began to walk inside. When I entered the spacious room, the first thing that came to me is the smell of medicine. I could hear quite clearly as I approached the bed on the other side, the breathing sounds like that of a wounded beast. I greet your majesty, my grandfather greeted first. The owner of the rough breathing was Emperor Jovanes. He was breathing hard against the bed wall, but the emperor was alive. Though he looks pale and blue-lipped, Jovanes was alive. Your majesty, the empress paused and couldn't get any closer on the bed anymore as if she was nailed on the ground. Ha, ha. When the emperor lifted one corner of his mouth, the sound of breathing in the room changed. I am alive. As if it was hard to say, Jovanes took another deep breath. You are pleased, aren't you, Empress? Empress Robini looked at the emperor and Perez alternately. She doesn't seem to know what to say. Her red lips only trembled. Second prince, yes, your majesty, closer. Perez leaned his head down near Jovanes and then went out of the bedroom. Soon after, he brought in a person, Maid Otua. The emperor called her coldly. You will be answering my questions without a single lie. End of chapter 231. Chapter 232. After Maid Otua came back from the Empress Palace, Head Maid Otua looked at the person in front of her with fearful eyes. The young man with black hair and reddish eyes had such an outstanding appearance that anyone would be mesmerized by it. However, for the head maid, he was the scariest and most fearful man, more than anyone else she has ever encountered. Has the Empress given you orders? Overly tense at Perez's low voice, the maid winced greatly. Yes, it's the venom of the titi spider. She said to put it in His Majesty's liquor just now. From his pockets, Maid Otua put the small bottle on the table with a trembling hand. The venom of a titi spider, Perez smiled as he reached out and rolled the small bottle in his grasp. If the Empress didn't move, he thought he should move first. I guess I'm lucky. Maid Otua crouched still with her head down at the words of the second prince, whose language were unknown. I didn't expect the Empress to save me the trouble. It was shortly after returning from the academy that the second prince first visited Maid Otua's home. He said if the Empress wants to harm His Majesty, come to me and let me know first. That's the reason behind the amount of money coming into Otua's secret account every year. The salary of the Emperor's maidservant was not small. However, the money she got from him was an astounding amount, even for Otua, who spent most of her time in her family's hometown, living a difficult life. Although she had the Empress backing her up, she wasn't loyal to her. She was blackmailed with her family as a hostage, and she was compelled to listen to her every command. However, the situation has become increasingly strange recently. Each time the second prince moved, the Empress' power has noticeably diminished, and even the Western representative changed. Maid Otua was terribly afraid of the second prince. She can't even meet his eyes properly right now. There was a reason for her fear. What should I do? Maid Otua asked carefully. The answer was a fixed question. The maid came to see the second prince with the thought of breaking the empress order to kill the emperor. Pour it in, yes? As the empress told you, pour the poison in his bottle. Ha, but Maid Otua was surprised and looked at the second prince. The red eyes she met for the first time was cold. Why are you surprised? Then His Majesty, this won't be the first time you've poisoned His Majesty's liquor. That, how do you? Instead of answering, Paris said with a faint smile. So this time you just have to poison the emperor, as the empress told you. The maid didn't answer. She was just looking down at her hands, grabbing tightly on the skirt of her dress. She then asked, with a trembling voice, what happens to my life? It was the same question she asked the Empress. Empress Ravini did not guarantee her own well-being. That was the biggest reason why Utua visited Perez. Let me leave the palace and live with a new identity. Perez stared at the maid before saying, is that what you want? Utua nodded, getting out of this scary palace, shaking off the shackles of her family. That's what she wanted. The maid reached out again and grabbed the bottle of poison, but the hand touching the lid of the bottle was still full of hesitation. Don't worry, if you give the antidote right after he collapsed, His Majesty will not die. Not yet. It can't be this easy. Perez was supposed to be the first to discover the collapsed emperor. If so, at the words of Perez, the complexion of Otua remarkably brightened. How come you grew a conscience now when it didn't even exist more than a decade ago, Lady Belia Otua? Perez said with a lot of sarcasm at the maid. I don't think there was any hesitation when you brought me poisoned food, Your Highness. The only person alive who entered and exited the abandoned palace is Bella Otua, the black-haired maid. She opened her eyes wide. Did you think I didn't know? Maid Otua got up from her seat and knelt in front of him. I'm sorry, Your Highness. Badump, badump. Her head pounding was so fierce that she even heard it while pressing her head on the floor. At that time, I had no choice but to, please forgive me. Stop with the meaningless apologies. Paris coldly cut off the maid. Go back to the Emperor's palace right now and poison his drink with the spider's venom. That's how you pay for your sins, Bella Otua. After a while, Maid Otua, whose body was trembling, answered with her head down. The order of His Highness the Crown Prince. I will follow. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Back to the present. Tell me what you did, Maid Utua, Emperor Jovanes asked, breathing hard. Maid Utua said, closing her eyes tightly. I have poisoned your majesty's drink. Who told you to do it? The maid raised her trembling finger to point at the empress. The empress. No, no, this is a slander, your majesty. The maid and the second prince conspired to frame me. Instead of giving up and being devastated, the empress seemed to choose to struggle to the end. Here is the bottle of poison the empress gave me, Maid Utua said, taking a small glass of bottle with just one finger from her sleeve. It can't be used as proof. The empress strikingly and threateningly approached the maid with eyes as if they wanted to rip that mouth off right away. Then she looked down at the maid with her gleaming eyes and said, Do you know what you're doing? It was obviously a threat. The maid took a frightening step but continued to bow her head down. She gave me the poison and told me to pour it all in His Majesty's bottle. Your Majesty, this is unfair. This time the empress approached the emperor's bed and begged, do you believe that maid's words over mine? It's just a vicious slander, your majesty. Then she grabbed the emperor's sleeves tightly, like in the conference hall. Please believe me, your majesty. How pathetic she seemed. It was a performance that anyone could fall for. Then Paris said, pulling something out of his arms. There is evidence. What? The empress spun her head quickly toward Perez. Here's a letter from the empress asking her henchmen to acquire the venom of the thiefy spider. It's a purple letter envelope. That was exactly what Cyril gave me in return for saving Balzac. No way, the empress said in between breaths, looking at the letter handed over to the emperor's hand, with doubt in her eyes. How did you? The emperor briefly checked the contents of the letter. His lips, which became paralyzed because he couldn't breathe properly, rose crookedly toward Empress Rabini, and he said with a shallow breath, How dare you do this to me? The emperor hastily retrieved his arm from the empress' grip before ordering the knights, Take the empress to the dungeon. Two knights waiting at the door immediately walked to the empress and dragged her by the arms. Let go of me, let go of me, let go. Empress Rabini struggled with all her might as she screamed. It was in an instant that her beautiful face turned ugly and distorted, and her perfectly dressed hair was messed up. Ah, let go of me. Do you know who I am? Let go. At one point, Empress Rabini resisted so strongly that even the knights were unsettled. Soon she glared at the emperor lying on the bed and began shouting, I resent you. I regretted that the poison didn't end up killing you, Jovanes. There was madness in the blue eyes of the empress. You're even more useless than a pig. Those ferocious eyes this time turned to Perez. Perez, you lowly thing from a filthy maid. I should have killed you with your mother. And she screams again. Why isn't heaven on my side? Why do you keep intercepting me? Why? Her wailing face continued to shed tears. She was resentful and furious, releasing everything from her mouth. At that moment, the eyes of the Empress with a glint of evil met mine. The Empress' face, which had been crumpled and twisted like a devil, slowly unfolded and opened her mouth. Her shaking blue eyes stared at me. It's you. The Empress mumbled somewhere in a weak voice. Everything. It was all because of you. I didn't answer, but I didn't avoid the Empress' eyes. Ha! The Empress laughed, with trembling lips, and it quickly spread into a big laugh. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. The Empress smiled madly as she bent her back. It's ugly. I don't want to see it anymore. Take her out. Emperor Jovanes frowned and ordered the knights. Yes, your majesty. Despite the rough handling of the knights, the empress did not rebel as she did a while ago. I was deceived. Ha ha ha. I'm a fool. She was just reeling and laughing out loud like a madman. Tears began to flow again in the face of the empress. Ha 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 ha. The sound of the empress' laughter as she was being dragged echoed from afar. End of chapter 232. Chapter 233. After the Empress was dragged away, Javanes began to breathe even harder. Whenever he breathed, he exerted himself so much and looked like he was in a much worse condition than before. Doctor, Lorenzo called the doctor in the corner, standing quietly with a frightened look. Ah yes, only then did the doctor rush up to Emperor Javanes and hold up a bottle of medicine in his hand. To think that that person was sitting in the Empress seat. Even though he got a little better after taking the medicine, Javanes was still busy swearing at Rabini. In the eyes of others, Jovanes and Rabini did not appear to be very different from each other. Jovanes was busy Staring contemptuously at the place where the Empress was taken, Lulak sat on a chair near the bed and was looking at Jovains with a pitiful heart for a moment before saying in a quiet voice, Tia, second prince, get out for a second. I'll be nearby, Perez answered and went outside with Florentia. Your Majesty. As soon as the door closed, Lulak opened his mouth. He didn't want to drag this conversation further. He just wanted to take his granddaughter back to the Lombardy mansion and lay down on his bed. Do you want to punish the Angenes? Of course, why ask? Jovains replied, drinking the whole medicine bottle before throwing it away once it's empty. He then continued, I will erase the Angenes on the map of this empire. Lulak shook his head in annoyance by Jovains' rationalization. Even though the sins the emperor had committed have come back at him, and even now, breathing has become a pain, Jovains never realized anything. How dare she bring her henchmen into the palace? They will be held accountable too. I'll make sure of that. He didn't think about why he was poisoned, and instead was struggling about how he was poisoned. That doesn't mean that Lulak had any affection to wake the foolish emperor up himself. It might be better for him this way. At least the second prince is smart, unlike Jovains. That's how Lulak made his judgment at the moment's notice and started to pursue. Wouldn't it be too much for you to do the work all by yourself? It's all right if I take a few days off. However, Lulak spoke without giving him a chance to respond properly. Please appoint a crown prince. Crown prince? Jovains frowned. It was a reaction that was so like Jovains, who didn't want to share his power with anyone. It's time to change your mind, your majesty. But again, Lulak did not give the emperor time to refute. As do I. So isn't it time for you to think about your successor? I can't believe there hasn't been a fixed successor yet. What would happen if your majesty had succumbed to the poison? Lulak spoke in the same tone as scolding a child. From the beginning, Jovains was no match for Lulak, and now that he can't breathe properly, there is literally nothing he can say about it. As if putting Jovains on the palm of his hand while looking down at him, Lulak, after giving him a moment, said in an authoritarian manner, the successor is not someone who takes away the power of the predecessor. He is the one who inherits it. Jovains no longer attempted to object to Lulak's words. He was just looking at Lulak with the dark circles underneath his eyes and breathing heavily. I'm not saying you should resign immediately. Rather, you appoint the second prince as the crown prince and make him your representative. A representative? It is to let your majesty do the things you already had decided upon. A crown prince that moves as he was told. It was obvious to Lulak that Jovain's eyes were shaking. Of course, Jovains didn't have a choice other than Perez. Lulak did not mention it. Instead, he said encouragingly, let the second prince punish the Anjanas and bury the empress' remaining sins. It is for everyone's sake, your majesty. Lulak's voice became even lower. What kind of ending does the family who were looking down on the emperor have by then? After saying so, Lulak no longer added a satire. He didn't have to say anything anymore. All he had to do was to sit back with his back comfortably on the chair and wait for Jovains to nod. After a while, yes, I'll do it. I like the idea. Jovain smiled at Lulak, assuming an expression that he really liked his suggestion. Looking at the figure in front of him, Lulak thought, the first emperor must have been a pretty smart man. Knowing that his descendants would not have enough power to continue the Lombro Empire, he smartly provided them with great support called Lombardy. With the stupid and foolish Jovains, Lulak used his hand to pass the emperor's power to the second prince who was worth it. As the head of Lombardy, he did a good thing for the imperial people in the end. Lulak smiled as he faced Jovains with a proud look. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Emperor Jovains brought us back faster than expected. However, the atmosphere in the room was very different from before we left. It was because the face of Jovains sitting on the bed was noticeably bright. Besides, whether his excitement has subsided, the emperor's breathing has become much softer, and his face had an unusual smile. What kind of conversation did they have with just the two of them? Both Perez and I looked at my grandfather with questions on our heads. However, my grandfather stood up smiling, quietly, and just took the outer garment he had taken off on the chair. And the very next moment, my curiosity was solved. Second Prince, Perez Brivacha Dorelli. Jovains called Perez's full name in an uncharacteristically solemn voice. Tell me, Your Majesty. As he beckoned, Perez replied, walking to the side of the Emperor's bed. Jovains looked at Perez for a while and said, I will appoint you as the Crown Prince. At that moment, the bedroom became quiet. I couldn't even hear the Emperor's annoying breathing. I checked Perez's face. Perhaps he was quite surprised that he stood there looking at Jovains without blinking. He looked neither happy nor sad. Perez is like a lost man who has so much emotion at once that he didn't know what to think. With that expressionless face, he was facing Jovains. I should have told Perez in advance that he becoming crown prince was somewhat expected. No, it happened rather a little later than in my previous life. Apparently, at that time, the emperor collapsed and became critical a few days after Perez was appointed as the crown prince. Thanks to this, Perez was finally able to wield the power in his hands without anyone noticing. The first target was the Lombardi family, especially V's. I suddenly became curious. In this life, the Empress used poison, but why did the Emperor collapse back then? I suppressed that curiosity and quietly looked at my grandfather. It was a given that Paris should be named the crown prince. When we left the room, there wasn't any kind of atmosphere like this at all. Grandpa, what kind of magic did you do? Perhaps my grandfather's training Jovaine's skills were much more proficient than I thought. How come you are not saying anything? Jovains urged Perez to speak. Then, as if he had woken up, Perez blinked. He immediately replied with a descendingly low voice, I accept your order. I accept your order. Also punish the Empress and Angenes thoroughly for their crimes. I kind of like that order. Now there is a justification for Perez to exact his revenge properly. Take this. Javains held out some papers to Perez. What is this? It is a letter to be given to the east, west, north, south, and central regions. Wouldn't you need their consent? In order for the emperor to appoint a crown prince, it is necessary for each region's family representative's approval, which was also a unanimous agreement. In addition, the heads of each family must gather at the imperial palace on a fixed day and stamp the consent form. Currently staying in the imperial city is Braun of the west, Sisu of the south, and Lombardy of the central region. There were only three families. If you want Ivan of the north or Luman of the east to come to the imperial city, you will have to give them a generous amount of time. 3 weeks at most, Grandpa said to Perez. Then he buttoned up his jacket before turning to call me. Let's go, Tia. The situation has calmed down, so we don't have to stay in the palace anymore. Yes, Grandpa. It was when I answered and tried to put on the outer garment I had in my hand that I got interrupted. Wait, Jovain said, Deputy Head Florentia Lombardi. Why are you calling me? Also by adding my title as Deputy Head. Riding the back stems, an ominous feeling flowed within me. I have a hunch that something really bothersome will happen. Grandfather also looks back at Jovain, narrowing his brows deeply. Yes, Your Majesty, I answered politely for now. I'll give you a mission too. Mission? You'll give me a mission? At the moment, I had to exert my superhuman powers not to look up and down at Jovains with very skeptical eyes. Grandfather also raised one eyebrow and asked, showing discomfort, What mission do you mean? As a representative of the imperial nobility, the deputy head should be a witness to ensure that the second prince's actions are legitimate. I knew it. It's a very annoying, just hearing it. I'm about to refuse until Jovain says the next thing. Also, if the second prince confiscates the money from Anjanas, then the deputy head of Lombardy will distribute it to the families who lent the funds to Anjanas. Oh my, if that's the case. I quickly lowered my head and hid the corners of my mouth that kept rising. The nobles who were deceived by Anjanas will be relieved. I'm amazed by your kindness. I also gave him some lip service to make him feel good. I heard it's almost time for him to die if he does something he usually won't do. If I'm sure I can compliment Jovains this much before he left for this world. I can't be let out of bullying the Angenas. With the money lent, at the loss of the pellet company, and at the cost of repairing Clarivan's house, how much money do I have to reap out from them? I'm worried if there's anything left in Angenas, where the cash dried up a long time ago. I'll be bad. It'll be bad to go to follow your command. I'll be glad to follow your command, Your Majesty. A wise old saying that even dried squid comes out of salty water. End of chapter 233. Chapter 234. Paris came to the front of the imperial palace to see Florentia and the head of Lombardy off. Second prince, Lulak was about to get into the carriage when he suddenly turned back and called Perez. It was His Majesty's order, so I will give you permission, but don't even think about using Tia for your personal gains. The head of Lombardy, whose fatigue can be seen on his face, was still taking care of his granddaughter. With or without the money of Angenes, leave Tia alone. The prince should be able to take care of most things by himself. Lulak's voice for his granddaughter was something Perez knew well, so he nodded his head without uttering a single word. Grandpa, it will be a huge sum of money. Next to him, Tia grumbled with dissatisfaction. I mean, Clarivan Pallet should also be rewarded. Get as much as you need from Lombardy. That's fine, is it not? I don't see why my granddaughter is picking up their mess. Did you forget that pellet company is mine too? Do you want me to take your money to fill the hole in my business? That's more of a loss. Well, that's true, but Lula couldn't refute Tia's words and was flustered. I have to get all the money back. I'm going to tear down Anjana's mansion and sell the bricks if I have to. Tia said, clenching her fist followed by her murmur, though I don't know who will buy it because it's bad luck. Lula could no longer say anything to his granddaughter, but stared briefly at Perez. Do well on your own, second prince. Yes, I understand. Tia grabbed Perez's arm when he gave out a flat answer and was eyeing him like, you don't understand anything. You don't. Even without speaking, he could hear that what she was saying with her eyes. Perez quietly escorted Tia to their carriage with a smile on his face. You should take it easy and don't overdo it, Tia told Perez through the closing door and was nudging him full of worries. Click. The carriage door closed, and Lombardi's carriage started to move. Perez, who stood looking at the back of the carriage for a moment before he turned around and began to move quickly. After confirming that the Empress had arrived in the dungeon, he made a list of the Imperial Knights who followed the Empress. Then he sent a trusted troop to the Angenes mansion located in the Imperial City to seal its gate. He sent letters to influential families, including Killian, who is the chairman of the aristocratic council, explaining what the Empress clan had committed and the imperatives to punish them severely. Finally, he sent a letter of the Crown Prince's appointment, written by Jovanes in blurry letters, to the representative families of each region, as if it has been prepared for a long time. Perez had done Perez has done the task continuously without any delay. The officials who were helping with the task were amazed, and their eyes were wide open seeing Perez work. Everything was done in just a few hours, as he worked like a machine without eating, drinking, or resting. Perez rose from his seat all of a sudden. I will go alone. He continued walking, leaving only those words to the Imperial Knights that were about to follow him. About Perez had wandered aimlessly, then at some point arrived somewhere and stopped. Whoosh! In winter, dreary-looking branches devoid of its leaves made a wretched sound in the wind. Paris looked up at the palace in the secluded forest. The doorknob was broken, and the rusty door rattled every time the wind blew. Paris took a few more steps towards the crumbling palace. He stepped on fallen leaves that had not yet rotted. Mother, Paris frowned slightly at the awkward word that he hadn't spoken for a very long time. It felt like he was wearing clothes that didn't suit him. The word mother didn't suit him. Likewise, Paris' mother, Kayla, a maidservant, was far from being a mother. My prince, your highness. His mother always called Perez that way, not as a son, but as if she was serving her master. Kayla smiled broadly when his young self read the book for her and happily talked about it. Even in the eyes of a young Perez, that smile is so beautiful. Seeing that she looked so happy, Perez eagerly continued to read. But that only happened once. Only once did Kayla show something similar to affection. He still remembered that time in midsummer, the gentle hand wiping away his sweat after running around in front of the detached palace that was still well maintained. You aren't hurt, are you? Sadly, after that, most of the memories of his mother were horrible things. With a sobbing voice, she looked up at the knight. I'd rather you kill me. Kill me now, please. Her shriveled hands held onto the knight that the Empress sent to prevent her from entering the palace. Kayla wanted to die. Soon after that, she refused to eat on her own. It was the only resistance Kayla could have made against a world that didn't give her the graces of death. Perez opened the door that was swaying in jeopardy and stepped into the palace. The birds that were building their nests in the collapsing ruins were startled and flew away. Some of the feathers they dropped were the only thing remarkable in this place. The palace, which was familiar and unfamiliar at the same time, was filled with dust that could no longer be distinguished between black and white. Mother, don't die, mother. Perez listened to his young self's pitiful voice, thinking that his voice seemed to come from somewhere in the ruins. Eyes that were dry because she refused to drink water didn't even shed tears as Kayla cried. Poor prince, the prince must live. She leaves behind her 11-year-old son and chooses to die. Then she started to speak that seemed to have no end. I have something to ask you, prince. The prince loves me, right? So will you listen? Listen carefully. Will you follow your mother's words? Live, and in the future, kill the emperor and empress. If you feel sorry for me, please avenge me. The ordinary brown eyes that seemed powerless gleamed fiercely at that time. Before that happens, the prince must not die until you avenge me. Mother, if you love me, please do me a favor. Survive and avenge me. Baiting a child's blind love for his mother, Kayla made such a cruel final wish. It's not over yet. Perez's rough voice echoed in the high ceiling of the palace. Are you a little satisfied now, mother? The word mother was swallowed in the end. A wind blew from somewhere and swept Perez's hair. Perez closed his eyes as the wind caressed his face. The dark shadows of those days, when he longed for a piece of affection and endured the horrible things while surviving alone, seemed to seep into his whole body again. It was then. I thought I told you the rest. The dark energy that had been imprisoning Paris was instantly shattered by a bright, clear voice heard from behind him. Is our future crown prince not going to listen to me anymore? He could tell without looking back. Tia, what are you doing here, Perez? His heart skipped a beat at the sound of small steps approaching without hesitation. I was just organizing my thoughts. Perez slowly turned around as he replied. Yeah, I thought you'd come here, Tia said, looking at him with her green eyes that seemed to glow, and she said, looking back at the old palace. It's been a long time since I've been here. This is a place full of memories. Memories, is it not? The first time we met was in the forest in front of this palace, and the second time was when we shared chocolate cookies in the bedroom over there. Ah, Paris' red lips were slightly wide open, remembering the times. If I'm the only one who thinks so, then I'm a little disappointed. Tia laughed. No, me too, Paris said as if urgently making excuses. I'm kidding, Paris. I knew how you feel about coming back here, so I made a joke on purpose. Tia, who said so, reached out to Paris' chest. Aren't you, Ad? You should be proud, happy even since you've won. Tia's vivid green eyes were as intense as seeing through everything. Is that okay? Of course. You survived and came this far. Tia said in a low voice. Good job. You're really amazing. So from now on, live a life for yourself, Perez. Not for anyone else, but for you. Perez quickly hugged Tia, for fear of hurting Tia. His hands trembled and he struggled in wanting to hug her tighter. Tia seemed a little surprised and quickly patted Perez on the back. Tia, yes, thank you. Hugging her body tightly once more, Perez thought, from now on, I will live a life for you. I will live a life for us. Right now, he revised his plan to demolish this palace. I have to rebuild this palace. Why all of a sudden? Buried in his chest, Tia's voice became muffled. Hearing it, Perez replied with a quiet smile. As Tia said, it's a place that contains our memories. In the woods near the Empress Palace, this little palace without a name would now be remembered by him in that sense. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. This young lady should go to work now, I shouted, checking myself in front of the mirror. Do you like it that much? About liquidating the properties of Angenes, my lady? Laurel asked as she smiled at me. Of course. They have a lot of hidden assets. There was no money left to pay off all their debts, but there will be money if we collect all their jewelry. How many secret places with expensive items are hidden throughout their large mansions? Today's the third day, and seizing the assets of the Angenes family was fun as if we were going on a treasure hunt. What are you looking for this time? Ruby? Diamond? While humming in a good mood, I was about to answer when, Sister! Oh, Granny! From afar, Granny approached fast with a big smile on his face. I heard you just came back from the academy, but I was so busy that I completely forgot. I thought so, so I came looking for you. Granny was quite tall and had a much brighter face than the time in his previous life. Is my early education paying off? It was natural since he was doing so much better in the academy right now than in his previous life. Where are you going? Oh, to do some cleaning. Cleaning? Yeah, something like that. Do you need anything? Is it urgent? Granny shook his head at my question. No, I just wanted to see my sister's face, so I came to say hello. Oh, my lovely boy, I said, patting his head like when he was a kid. Would you like to come back here tonight and have a meal together with me? Yes, I want to tell you about what happened at the academy, and I also have a present for you. Okay, this evening, oops, I stumbled down the stairs while talking to Granny. Are you all right? I almost sprained my ankle. Thanks to Granny, who was next to me, I didn't get hurt. This won't do. I'll escort you to the carriage, sister. I thought he was only tall, but he has a lot of power in his hand that was holding me. When did you grow up like this? I tried to stroke Granny's head again while saying so. However, Granny, I saw Granny's smiling face turn white, and the reason was immediately revealed. Who are you? Perez was approaching with a cold look with his gaze stuck in my hand, holding Granny's. End of chapter 245. Chapter 235. Oh, feeling troubled, a vague sound came out of Granny's mouth. His feet were as if rooted to the ground, and his big round eyes locked at an angry Paris approaching us. Even though Granny's life wasn't in danger, it would be difficult for him to endure all that glaring and threatening aura coming from Perez. Ha! I sighed softly while pulling Granny slightly behind me. Then I raised my hand towards Perez and said, Perez, stop. At my words, Perez stopped in his tracks a few steps away from me. However, his gaze continued to glare at my hand holding Granny's. Woo, sister, from behind my back, Granny called me in a frightened voice. Oh God, one of them is a guy who skipped 2 years at the academy while serving as a student council this year, and the other one is a guy who skipped 1 year being the first place of the academy and the student council president. I can't believe this is happening. I let go of Granny's hand and instead pointed to Granny's face and asked Perez a question. Don't you think you've seen this face before? As if Granny's existence itself was unpleasant, Perez's red eyes has darkened as he turned to stare at Granny. He you're doing all sorts of things again. Granny was eventually frightened and started to hiccup. Think carefully, Perez. Didn't you see him once when he was young and when he was this big? Perez's thick eyebrows creased while he thought about it for a while. Oh, Varus briefly recognized him and opened his mouth. Granny? He found out fast. Seeing him hesitating while calling his name, it was clear that he was not sure. Oh, I haven't seen you in a long time, Your Highness. You've changed so much that I didn't recognize you. Varus muttered with a bit of making excuses uncharacteristically. Then he looked at me and said, I'm telling you, I didn't recognize him. Yes, of course, because you are not interested in the people around you. No, I'm interested in Tia. What are you talking about? As I was flustered at Perez, Granny smiled at Perez. Granny smiled broadly and blurted out, You two look great together, standing side by side like this. What? Looking at the bright face of Granny, it seemed he really meant it. It didn't seem to be in consideration that Perez and I were engaged, and that the whole empire knew. But we temporarily broken up our engagement after I became the successor of the household. One is the heir to the throne, and the other is the successor to the Lombardi family. It's like looking at two different worlds. Granny continued to speak in a bright tone. But you look so great together. Rumor has it that you didn't miss getting first place in the academy. You must be very smart. Perez nodded as he tapped Granny on the shoulder. Don't talk nonsense. Let's go now and head out to Angena's, Perez. These days, Perez was talking to me, taking me every morning to work in Angena's mansion. I've repeatedly refused to went straight home to Lombardy from the palace and headed for the Angena's mansion in Imperial City, saying it was ridiculous. I didn't have the ability to win over the stubbornness of those guys from Lombardy once they start unless I started to move first. You are going to Anjana's sister? Granny said, and opened the carriage door for me. Because I have to take what I need. Don't push yourself too much. Too much? It was common to say these things, but it sounded a little different this time. There are so many families involved with Anjanas. If you want to take into account all of their interests, you will be very tired. You even thought about it, huh? I thought he was only tall, but Granny had grown more mature as well. Hehe, I meet people from so many different families at the academy. Some people want to get the money they lent to Anjanas, and some want to bury the fact that they are acquainted with them, even if they lose their money. It was as Granny said. As soon as rumors spread that the Empress was imprisoned in a dungeon and that I was in charge of cleaning up the Ingenis, I received dozens of letters. There were also several personal requests and pleas for help. In fact, it was more difficult to organize the tremendous inbound of letters from such families than to dispose of Angenis properties. But Granny seized right through it. Let's talk more over dinner tonight, Granny. Yes, sister. Have a safe trip. Granny stepped back with a smile. Although he was a lot taller, his smile when he was younger still remains. My gaze on Granny stayed longer until the carriage departed. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Father, Shananet called Lulak. Standing by the window, Lulak was watching the carriage. His granddaughter rode as it set off for the imperial city. He turned at his daughter's call. Why did His Majesty ask Tia to clean up Anjanas? Shananet, who especially cares about her nephew, is particularly concerned about Javane's intentions. He's been wary of Lombardy's power all his life, yet this time he's given such responsibility to the new Lombardy successor. Responsibility was bound to be accompanied by power. For the noble families who had something to receive from Anjanus, Tia has become a being with absolute power. It's probably because of the second prince, Lulak answered calmly. With Tia as a Lombardi, along with her cleaning up the imperial mess, it means they have to stop thinking about Tia's origins. Javanes did the right thing for the first time in his whole life. Do you have to go along with it, father? I can't help it. Although I'm worried that Tia might be getting hurt, still, she needed rapport to sort out bigger things. Lulak spoke bitterly, yet with resolute. But Shananet shook her head. I don't agree with father this time. How come? I've been thinking that it would be nice that Tia has everything. Shananet's smiling face was somewhat lonesome, with a life in which she can live as the head of Lombardy and also live with all of her loved ones. Shananet was happy with her present life, and she worked for the family she was rewarded day by day. The empty space next to her didn't bother her that much. In the past, she had chose love over her family, and now she only chooses her family. But Tia is not like that. His Highness and Tia are deeply in love with each other, as grandfather knows. How can we not know unless we're blind? His granddaughter seemed to be trying so hard to hide it, but her eyes never sparkled more than when she saw him. So he felt proud and sorry for his granddaughter who chose to live as the head of Lombardy, rather than for her love for someone. Tia is thinking of cutting off her relationship with His Highness, the second prince, and only live for her family. That's what she is, Shananet said to Lulak, who nodded with his mouth shut. But is that really the path that father who has lived his whole life for the family wants Tia to walk? Lula could not answer easily, living at the expense of everything for his family. The things that were lost in the wind were too important in a person's life. Lulak didn't spend time with his little ones and wasn't a very good father. He wasn't a good husband who could take care of his wife as she was getting weak. It was all because of Lombardy. It was because Lulak himself put the family's honor first before anything else. If I could live once again, I wouldn't live like that. It was a choice that Lulak had regretted repeatedly while laying on his bed at night. A life to live again. It was a futile imagination, but if he could, he would be a little more greedy. Greed to take everything without making a choice. Lulak nodded slowly once again. Yes, you're right, Shananet, he said, looking at the carriage after it passed Lombardy's front gates, which were slowly closing. I was taking Tia's sacrifice for granted without knowing. There must be a love somewhere out there that does not end even after a lifetime. Lulak himself regrets a life that he blindly spent solely for the bloodline. Nevertheless, he was hoping that his granddaughter would only understand Lombardy with a heart. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. How's it going, Clarivan? Wearing his glasses again, after a long time, Clarivan smiled at me. I'll be able to find and get the money back, Clarivan said competently. And from the first day, he had been turning Anjana's mansion upside down. The work itself is going smoothly. However, I'm worried that Anjana's debt is larger than I thought. Is it that bad? If you look here, Clarivan said as he held out some papers to me. Did you discover all of this today? Are they mushrooms? Why do they keep coming out of nowhere? I looked at the newly discovered IOUs. It was a sight to see. IOU or IOU is a written acknowledgement of that one person owes to another. They seem to have borrowed money from their own vassal, but the due date for the payment is not fixed and there is no interest rate. In addition, there is a clause that says Anjana shall not be held liable if the debt cannot be repaid under unavoidable circumstances. It was an amount that would be a tremendous burden to their vassal family. Moreover, it was as plain as day that this was almost to the level of extortion. While I was looking at the document, Clarivan spoke. If you please, would you give me your time in a few days? Time? If you have anything to say, you can say it now, Clarivan. At my words, Clarivan waves his hands. No, it's not urgent. So I'll tell you again, when you don't have much work to do. I get quite curious. It was because Clarivan's face while talking to me seemed tense. This world's Clarivan palate is nervous. It's not a bad thing, is it? Such a thing. No, it's not. Clarivan looked like he wasn't ready yet. Sometimes there are things that take time to put out into words. It's fine. So I nodded and put the matters of the IOUs back in my head. However, not before long, Clarivan suddenly approached me and said, "There seems to be a new problem, Lady Florentia. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Even if I dispose of all, even if I dispose all of Angeni's properties, is it not enough to pay off all of their debts?" Sitting in his office, Perez raised one eyebrow at the official's report. "Yes, Your Highness. Even if we seize all of their tangible properties, real estates, and accounts, what about the property of the vassal lords?" The official winced at Perez's question. Strictly speaking, it was right to confiscate and dispose of all the properties of the families who were in the same boat with Angenes. Then it was clear that the opposition from the nobilities would increase. Your Highness, its Perez frowned as the official hesitated without answering. What does Lombardy think about this issue? I haven't spoken to them yet. Anyway, the pellet company is also one of the creditors, Your Highness, the official said while looking into Perez's eyes as he snicked a hint. If Lombardy finds out and asks us to raise the priorities of pellet, money was scarce, and there are many who will want to get it back. Therefore, he asked in case the priorities would naturally be set according to the power of the family. Let us do what the deputy head of Lombardy asks us to do. Coincidentally, it was when the official nodded and tried to answer that the door burst open. Your Highness, may I speak with you for a moment? With an irritated face, Tia entered the office. End of chapter 235.